Hey, friend, welcome to the Doing What Matters podcast. I'm your host, Teresa McCoy.
And I'm your co host, Erica Vinson, and we are thrilled that you are listening in today as we dive into discussions about life, business, and all the things that truly matter.
On the Doing What Matters podcast, we embrace a very holistic approach to living, a way of life that's rooted in rest, not rush. It's about connecting to our real self, our real life, and our real work, remembering who God uniquely created us to be, and redefining success through a different lens.
Whether you're here to find inspiration, practical advice, or just a moment of connection, we're glad you're here. Let's dive into today's conversation. Before we dive in too far, I just want to mention that we have another free resource for you. You can find more information in the show notes, but you will want to head over to thereallifeprocess.com/book resources and download the real life resource packet. And so it's going to go right along with what we're talking about today as we're talking about redefining success.
So, Erica, with you today in conversation. And as we were talking before we hit record, there's a line that we even say right there as we're welcoming you to the podcast that says, redefining success. And what does that look like? And it really got me thinking. I actually had listened to another podcast this week that talked about how you and I both work as coaches, how we help people define success. I just wanted to have a conversation today about that word of success and how we throw that word around a lot. And people say things like, I want to be successful. Where do you hear that word success come up in the work that you do?
Well, I think clients talk about wanting to be
Mhm.
successful. I mean, I think it's in all of life. It's personal, it's professional, and oftentimes it comes out of someone feeling like they haven't been successful or they've missed the mark.
Right.
There's a failure piece, that dreaded F word that
Yeah.
we wrestle with.
I agree. Because of the work that we both do, sometimes it feels like, at least for me, that I'm like, man, all we do is talk about getting to the next thing, being successful, achieving, all of those words that go together, which in my personality, I have to be careful because those things can really be triggering for me of have I done enough? Am I enough? All of those things. So let's start out first just by talking about how do we define success? What are some of the things that come in?
Well, the things that we hear from the world are sometimes it's financially tied, sometimes it's a certain level of education or achievement, a certification or credential that someone brings. It can be relationships and status in that. There's so many different things.
It's interesting just in my own personal life, and I don't know where it is for you, but for me, education was one of them for a very long time. And this is still hard for me to say today, but in true transparency, I have never finished my bachelor's degree. And before I started the coaching business, I was really, gosh, I don't know. I have to think how old I was, but I was really thinking about going back to school. I just left the ministry position that I was in where you and I had worked together. And I was thinking about going back to school to get my counseling degree and finish it up. I think I'm a semester a little bit short of completing my bachelor's. And then, long story short, I found out about coaching and I decided I would take that same money and invest. But I used to define that I was successful or not based on the level of education. And I still have a huge respect for education. At some point, I still may finish my degree. Not that I need it to do the work that I do, but it's been a journey for me over the last 10 years to redefine that success isn't the diploma that I have in my that's been one for me. What are some places where you've up against what successful life was or not?
Well, I think one of the things that I can wrestle with that I see others wrestle with too is a comparison. And so when we look across and we go, oh man, as I'm building this business, I'm not as far in, or I don't have as many clients, or I should be doing the shoulds, the oughts, all of those things can really
Mhm.
creep into what feels or whether it's a message in my head, a story I'm telling myself, can look like this is successful when I look across. And so that comparison can be a big barrier for me and just going, Is that success?
Yeah. Yeah, like at this stage of life, I should be further along or I should. That's a huge one. I also think people use different language around success. What I might say is success, what you say is success, what people around the world. You and I have both traveled internationally and even together, and we've been in some pretty poor places in the world as far as monetary, gain. And yet, how tied together are happiness and success? Because my daughter that's adopted from Romania, we've gone back, we've met her family, totally different culture, totally different systems, totally different level of things. And I would say they're very successful. I just think that that comes into play too of how we define success and happiness and how they go together.
Absolutely. And I think it's Ruth Haley Barton that really helped to kind of flip some of this on its head for me. And when she asked the question, how do I want to live so I can be who I want to be?
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. It's a great quote from her of how do I want to live in my everyday life? I love that passage of scripture. I talk about it often from Romans 12:1 and 2 of my everyday ordinary life. Let's take it a little bit further because as we talk life and business and it all goes together and we look at it holistically, there are lots of ways over the years that I've tried to develop a success plan. I think even in my bio, many times I say I've read every self help book, I've done every course there is, all the things. There's lots of ways that we try to develop a success plan or get a plan together. What are some things you've done?
Absolutely reading.
Oh,
I
that's
know
your
one
favorite.
one point in my life, I remember you telling me like stop reading. And it
Mhm.
really was because you have enough information. And so discovery and learning is a value of mine. Even when things are great, I love to learn and I love to celebrate how I'm growing. So that contributes to success and looking at, oh, yeah, it's the affirmation, when I can hear, even through a book or a podcast, something that's affirming the growth that I'm making. And I think it can also be this kind of just hunger for solid ground sometimes. And that was, the season I was in, even when you had said to me, like, stop reading,
Yeah.
stop gaining more information, stop and pause and be here. And so it can be almost kind of an obsessive, just hunger for more that I don't need. And
Yeah.
so
And
that
I
can
think a lot of
be a
us can go
barrier.
there with trying to develop, oh, probably the next thing that I do or the next book that I read or the next system or process. I was just having a conversation the other day with someone and they were old enough as I am to remember Franklin planners. I paid a pretty good amount of money to go to St. Louis, Missouri and go to an all-day training. I was probably late 30s on the Franklin Planner because that was gonna be the do all end all that was gonna organize my life. When I was first married, I was gonna be the best housekeeper, or whatever you wanna call it, there ever was, and I had a little card box file that had all my chores I needed to do and in numerical order. I know people still use that today, only it's probably technical and, like, when I need to do them so that I would make sure that quarterly I flipped my mattress, did my sheets, and did all the things organized. I've always been a little bit obsessed with anything around a plan for my life, plan for my home, plan for my time, all of those types of things. I think those are great things. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But sometimes, I don't know about you, but I can feel like if I get off the plan that's going to lead me to this great success, that I don't know how to get back on it. And I feel like I've failed and I just have to go out and look for more information or something new.
The rigidity of following a plan to the T and following a plan that really was written and had ownership from someone else of this worked for me, so this should work for you. And it reminds me of even scripture in the Bible where David goes out for battle and Saul wants him to wear his armor, like puts him in his armor and it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And so we can't walk around in what fits for someone else and expect it to be something that serves us well.
We can't always step into somebody else's shoes and do what they've done. So many times, even when you and I are working as coaches, we just talked about it yesterday. You just did some teaching inside of one of our communities. And we were just talking about this yesterday of sometimes people want you, it's just our human nature. We want somebody else to tell us what to do. We want somebody to give us the answer. And so in coaching, we try to stay in the question, not the answer. There's nothing wrong with giving an answer, being consultative, doing those things. But the best discovery that someone can do for their own life is their own plan, not someone else's. And it took me years to realize because I just always had shame around, oh, I didn't follow the plan right. So, whether it's the diet plan or the whatever. So I'm a failure. I messed up. Yeah, we like something better when we talk about success. And that's a phrase that really comes from spiritual language and wording, which is something called a rule of life, which is a little bit different than a success plan.
Well, as you even say the word rule of life, notice the resistance that comes up when the word rule,
Like,
because I think that your relationship with how guidance has been given or discipline or direction in your life could be, oh, I'm
yeah,
not doing a rule because rules are meant to be broken or
right.
rules keep me boxed in. And so everybody's definition of success is different. And when you look at a rule of life, maybe the word rhythm, a rhythm of life
Yeah.
might be something that you're more drawn to, but rule might be a guardrail. It might be a boundary. It might be, we have a coach that talks about it. She said, when I go to the bowling alley, it's for
Hmm.
me that I can still fluctuate. I still have flexibility. I still have choice, but I know that there's some guardrails and some handles that I can access that will give me some stability as I'm walking through life.
Yeah. And we often talk about it's a framework, and that framework gives us those guardrails. It gives us some structure. But yet, from a spiritual place, the passage in John that talks about the trellis and the vine, and the word rule comes from the word regula, and all of that root meaning and language that we have. But it's a framework to ensure that we're headed in the direction that we have discerned with God, that is the place for us to go. Because success plan or being successful feels so driven and so energy driven. And success, and the opposite of success, we often say is failure. Whereas using language that's more around, I've created uh, a rhythm to my life, a rule for my life. It sounds so much freer, even when I say it out of my mouth, than, well, I have a plan for how I'm going to succeed. And we use that language a lot in our businesses of success. But actually, as I have over the last 10 to 12 years moved towards more having a rhythm to my life and a rule to my life, I feel like it's a living, breathing thing, different than I've got this plan for success that I'm on and I can't veer off of it.
Well, even just reframing that word rule, I'm thinking about you gave me for my birthday this year this beautiful pot of succulents. And there's one of them that, I mean, it is the
Yeah,
tallest, it is
the tall one.
thriving. I send you pictures frequently, so you know what
Yeah.
it's like. But it has gotten to the place where it has grown so much that even the weight of its own greatness
Mhm.
in the pot, it's leaning over. So I've had to put some stability in there and rods, and I just keep tying it with twine as it kind of bends over. And as I did, little flowers started to form. And so as we were talking about even this a coaching framework as we go, oh, we just want someone else to tell us, but it's really the answers are within you. Well, that can feel heavy. My own
Mhm.
growth, my own success can feel heavy sometimes, but having that as a stability point for me is so encouraging to go, I know where I can tie myself. I know where I can
Yeah.
come back and lean in. And so that's where rule of life has become really freeing. And that framework actually is something that provides some groundedness and a way forward.
And we were talking earlier about, for each of us, we define success differently. The thing I love about creating a rhythm to my life or a rule of my life, I get to say it the way I want to say it. So it, there's nothing wrong with using a plan or someone plan. Technically, that's what the real life process is. It's a framework and a plan that we give to people of saying, here, go create your rule of life. But you and I have both had people say one of the things we do in that the work that we do with the process that we have is we'll say, well, what are the areas that matter in your life? What are the big buckets or rocks? We call them areas of focus that matter in your life. And they'll go, well, what are yours? And I might call like my work area my profession, whereas somebody else might call it their career. I don't know.
That area for me is professional. I worked with a client last week and I loved how she framed it. She calls it her impact area of
Um,
focus. And I was
See,
like,
wow, I love that because
yeah.
her rule of life, that's the language that she gives it. And I think that's what I love about using a rule of life rather than this great success plan that somebody else has given you. You own it differently when you write it the way you would want your life to be and you bucket together things the way you see them depending on your season of life and where you're at. Some people go, my health really matters to me. So they call that area of their life fitness or whatever, whereas somebody else doesn't call it that at all. They don't even have it in as a bucket. That's what I love about the idea of creating a rule of life that is yours and that you take ownership in. Some of the other benefits to me are I don't feel the shame around it or the I messed it up. I have something to come back to, but I don't feel as much like disappointment in myself if I get off track a little bit. It's a little bit freer.
It reminds me of something that we talked about years ago. If you think about even sheep, there's a couple of different approaches to kind of herding sheep. And it's like, well, you can build fences around to where the sheep go, they just don't leave that area. Or some farmers will actually put just a well in the center that the sheep come back to in the middle.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
think that's an illustration of what this rule of life or rhythm of life looks like. It's like we can box ourselves in with all of these rules that some days on our best day, we can maintain them and we can live them. And some days we fail because it's like we miss the mark. And so we bump that fence and it's like, oh, there we go. We're past the fence again. We knocked
Yep.
it down. And it's like there's a different approach though when we go, okay, what do I come back? How do I return
Mhm.
here to this one central place where I'm looking at what was today like? What was life giving? What was life draining for me? Where were the people in my life that mattered? So are the things that I'm doing actually lining up with what I'm saying I value?
And
And
that's where
I
those practices that we often refer to that there's practices really come underneath your rule of life. So there's the bigger what you've written down, what you've described, where you want to see your life grow to. So this is all very growth mindset and where you want to see you to continue to develop in your relationships and in your spiritual walk and in your health and fitness and in maybe growing of resources and finances and things like that. All of it's a growing part. So we don't become stagnant. But it's also underneath are all these small little practices like reviewing it, looking back at your coming back to the well, as you described, on a regular basis. And whether that's weekly, we love the rhythm of a weekly kind of review and also maybe every quarter, once a quarter, you're kind of getting up on the balcony, getting out this rule of life and looking at it. And that's what I love of, okay, I have this success plan. And a lot of times I work with business owners and where do you want to be in 3 years? And all of that is great and wonderful. But it's really hard to say what life is going to bring you as well in the next 3 years. So having something that's a rhythm that's moving and breathing with you, I don't know, it's just been so much freer than I'm on this success path and I'm running the ball to the end of the field as fast as I can get it there. The idea of a rule of life might be an invitation that we want to give to you and want to bring to you. as we tie this up today and just considering that how could I do this differently? And there's a lot of great resources out there about rule of life stuff and how to bring it. Some of our favorite people, Mark Comer has some great work out there about rule of life. Erica, you mentioned
Ruth Haley
Ru-
Barton.
Ruth Haley Barton,
Yeah,
Sacred
Sacred
Rhythms
Rhythms.
is one of our books that we would probably recommend. John Mark Comer's new
Practicing the Way.
Practicing the Way. I know I wouldn't get the title right. And that Ruthless Elimination of Hurry is another great one for him. My book, Do What Matters, is really about setting you up to create a rule of life. We call it the real life process. But when I was listening to this podcast speak about how we help our clients define success, I always want to do that, but I want to do it from a realistic, holistic approach. I was actually just meeting with a client this morning, and she's making a pretty major shift in her life as she comes into the end of this year. And I just wanted to sit with her in both the celebrations of what's been good and also the how it's going to look differently and how her rule of life, her rhythms of life are going to shift and change.
Mm. Yeah, that's so good. I was thinking, can't remember even who the author was, but it was talking about the story of the prodigal son. And it can feel like even when we set up a rule of life, sometimes looking at that, okay, what's sustaining me like daily, weekly, monthly, or seasonally? And I love that you said like that shifts, right? Seasonally, depending on what we're doing. And when you think about the prodigal, it's like sometimes we can look at it and go, how many times have I wandered away from this plan or this rule? And the shift that I loved in the story that I read was really about, and are you willing to celebrate how many times you've returned?
Oh, that's
It's not
good.
about how
Yeah.
many times have I wondered, I've wondered 10,000 times, over the last, and it's like, but that means you've returned
Mhm.
10,000 times. And
And
so
you and I
can we
have that with
celebrate?
clients, right? They almost come and they have this like, well, I didn't do what I said I was going to do, or I didn't do that doesn't matter. It's that you are willing to start again. You're willing to look at it again. You're willing to look back at your rhythms of life. You look back at the projects that you created, the growth that you're doing in recovery work. I remember when our son was in a treatment center, actually, and our family went to visit. And I did not want to hear that relapse was a part of recovery.
Mm,
I just didn't wanna hear that because I didn't wanna ever think that Eric was going to relapse again, and yet reality was, and I've learned over years now in my own life, that's really what life is all about, is the returning back to the ultimate success plan that we know through scripture and making sure that's a part of the bigger plan of our rule of life. But what we're talking about here is while I'm on this earth, what does God have for me to live out? And there are so many different directions and different ways we could go. So I know you and I both really feel that this rule of life, rhythm of life journey is a discernment process. And that's a whole nother conversation, not for today's podcast. But friend, if you're out there and you're listening in as Eric and I are sharing today, we just want to invite you to consider how you might take a plan that you have, whether you keep it in a planner, you keep it on digital, you've written it down somewhere, you have it like consider what would it look like to flip that a little bit, even in language to say, this is a rhythm that I'm creating in my life, not something I'm driving to in that.
there's such a freedom
Mm.
that comes when we start to give ourselves permission to order our days in the ways, as we said, how do I want to live so I can be who I want to be? And that word rhythm really is a beautiful invitation. So, yeah, we do. We just want to invite you to, and we've provided a framework here to check out that free resource that we mentioned. Again, it's at the free, how about the reallifeprocess.com /book resources. And it's a framework to start your success plan. And we would love to connect with you, even if you're finding that helpful. And so
Yeah.
reach out, let us know how that's going.
That guidebook goes along with the book, Do What Matters, Live from Rest, Not Rush. Both of those resources together can help you. I write about it in the book about rule of life and those types of things. Hey, friend, thanks for being with me again. I'm loving having you co host with me. You have such wisdom and wonderful things that you bring and new voice in the room. So if you're new listening back in or returning back into the podcast, Erica has joined me in co hosting here on Doing What Matters. And I'm excited for it because it's fun to have conversation rather than just my voice talking in your ear. So we would love it too. If you give us a review on the podcast, you can do that super easy in your favorite podcast player. Just drop in and say what you're loving about the show. And we always appreciate that feedback as well. So remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for and looking for them through the lens of your rhythms of life. So we'll be back next week.
Thanks for tuning in.